Now, as former State Department official David Tafuri, he is also a former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor. Good to have you, and I want to get to those troops, the U.S. troops, in a moment, David. But first, listen, this. Posturing is a major play in Putin's playbook. I mean, he has the U.S., NATO, Europe on alert, and he already has operatives on the ground in Ukraine. So on a level, he has won. Does this give Putin that off-ramp to stand down his troops and maybe retreat from the Ukraine border?
It's a good question. I think what your viewers probably care most about is the question of whether Russia is going to mount a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and what more can the U.S. do to ensure that does not happen? My personal view is that Putin has not decided yet whether to order the troops into Ukraine. He's weighing the weaknesses, and if he believes that the retaliatory action by the U.S. and the European countries will far outweigh the benefits of invading, then he won't do it. But I think the Biden administration and the European leaders are waking up to the reality that they haven't done enough yet to deter Putin, as Russia seems to be leaning forward on a possible invasion. So the Biden administration is now weighing what more it can do, and it's looking at more significant retaliatory measures, which will include sanctions that will hit at the heart of the Russian economy, including at the defense and petroleum sector industries, and also sanctions that would cut Russia off from the international banking system. But even that is probably not enough, and I think the Biden administration and the European countries recognize that. So that's why they're also thinking about moving U.S. troops into other Eastern European countries. Now, those troops aren't going to be able to defend Ukraine because they're not going to be in Ukraine. So the Biden administration is also looking at doing more to support the covert operations to train and equip the Ukrainian military. And I think that is going to ramp up as well. The hope is that all of those things combine to be enough to deter Putin from moving forward.
What do you think? Will it be?
I don't know, and I think it really depends both on what the Biden administration does next and what the European countries do next, and if Putin believes that the U.S. and Europe are lockstep on this and that there is going to be a coordinated response, both in terms of the military support for Ukraine and in terms of the sanctions. Sanctions really won't work if it's just U.S. sanctions. It has to be global sanctions supported by the Western powers in Europe and the U.S. and perhaps our other allies in Asia, such as Japan.
Yeah, but that gets tricky if you're not going to have, Germany is a strong economy, and they're not so 100% on board with sanctions against Russia because they depend on Russia for the natural gas. But let me play some sound from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on how the U.S. would respond if Putin decided to attack a member of NATO.
We have an Article 5 commitment to our NATO partners, and so if Putin were to attack one of those countries, then of course that commitment, that's an ironclad commitment. The president has said a number of times that we will live up to that commitment. And so, but again, our focus is not on fighting in Ukraine. It's on reassuring our NATO partners and allies.
Yeah, and David, finally, meanwhile, you've got the Ukraine president, Zelensky. He's in a tough spot. He has to keep his residents calm, his economy intact, keep the U.S. and NATO on his side, and he has to appease Putin on a level as not to, strike the match and inflame this situation. What's your take on that?
Well, President Zelensky came into the presidency without a lot of previous experience, so this is a real challenge for him. It's the biggest challenge he's going to face. Like you said, he has to calm the country, but he also at the same time has to prepare the country for a potential invasion. As Greg mentioned in the earlier segment, the Ukrainian military is training. There are also militias in Ukraine that are training. They're also heavily armed. And so Zelensky has to show leadership in terms of preparing a defense of the country. But he also has to try to convince the U.S. and Europe to do more to support him. Secretary Lloyd Austin mentioned the Article 5 protection that NATO gives to NATO members, but because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, that's not going to benefit Ukraine. And that's why it's going to take real leadership from Zelensky to get that type of support he needs.
Not a NATO member, but it seems very clear that the U.S. is very much behind Ukraine. Meanwhile, all of this, and China's watching to see what happens as their next move with Taiwan. Oh, boy. David Tafuri, thank you very much for joining us. I have a feeling we'll see you again. Thanks, David. Take care.
Thanks, Arthel.